Hello and welcome to Inform New Hampshire. My name is Dean Kern and my co-host here, Richie Merritt. We have a special guest today, Hal Shurtleff, and we'll introduce him in just a minute. We air our show on Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturday, Sunday here on Manchester Cable Television. We also have a YouTube channel, Inform New Hampshire. We also have a Facebook page, Inform New Hampshire. So look them up, like us, and subscribe if you will. We talked a little bit a few weeks ago about the Article 5 convention, and we're going to do that again today. I want to start out real quick by turning it over to Richie and just talk a little bit about a fundraiser coming up for the political prisoner Jerry DeLamus, one of our fellow patriots here in the state of New Hampshire, who was rounded up by the feds for his participation in Nevada at the Bundy Ranch 2 years ago. And most of the charges were trumped up against him. He wasn't even there at the time they say he was, and there's a number of ridiculous charges that they're holding him as a political prisoner out there in ridiculous conditions that you wouldn't wish on anyone. So it's a crime what's happening, and somehow they get away with it. But there's going to be a fundraiser here in New Hampshire, so I want you guys, Richie, if you want to talk about that, go ahead.
Yes, Jerry DeLamus is a good friend of ours. He's been railroaded. Basically, he went out to, and you can catch this on YouTube if you want to check out the video. It's JerryDeLemus. He went out there to do a documentary and to try to talk people. He refers to it as talking them off the mountain. He just wanted a peaceful resolution, so he went out because he knew some of these people. And he's been charged with all types of things because the government wants to make an example of him. Anyway, we're having or Jack Kimball, I guess, is heading this up. We're having a fundraiser on the 14th of May, which is a week from Saturday, between 4 and 6 p.m. at 120 Washington Street in Rochester. We'd appreciate it if you could all show up. A little show of strength would help. And I'm sure that the fundraising for him and his wife would go a long way towards the legal fees.
Can you mention that website as well?
Oh, yes. If you want to contribute to him and you can't make the fundraiser, it's www.patriotjerry.com, and you can contribute there also. And with that, I want to introduce, if Dean doesn't mind, I'll do the introduction. Mm-hmm. Hal Shurtleff, who I've known for quite some time but only met recently. Mm-hmm. We've known each other in kind of passing. But Hal is the New England director of or New England coordinator of the John Birch Society. And I've watched you from afar, and I admire your work. And there's nothing like common sense, and you exude it. So,
well, thank you for that.
I appreciate you coming up here to talk about the Article 5.
Oh, I'm glad to do it. Thank you for having me on.
Yep.
It's always a pleasure to come up to this area, and I've been a guest on a number of shows on this cable station. So,
right. Well, welcome, and yeah, if you could start out, tell us a little bit about the John Birch Society and your role there.
I'm glad. Yeah, the John Birch Society is a not-for-profit educational organization founded by the late Robert Welch of Belmont, Massachusetts, named after missionary-turned-soldier John Morrison Birch, who was brutally murdered by the Chinese communists at the close of World War II. Our goal is to educate and inform the American people on some of the problems that we're facing. We believe that most of the events, political events, are happening by design. It's not simply naivete or ideology, although that's part of it. In fact, naivete is one of the biggest reasons we're in this mess. Mm-hmm. But we believe that these things are happening by design and on purpose. And the culmination would be something what they referred to as H.W. Bush referred to as a New World Order. Mm-hmm. And the UN is envisioned by its founders, and if you don't believe that term, just go to a YouTube channel and put in George Bush, New World Order. He'll sum up that. We believe that our Constitution was probably the greatest document to govern mankind, and that if we adhered to it, many of these problems would be resolved. And that we've had a steady growth of government over the last 100+ years. And the only way to solve that is to create and inform voters. It's also a moral issue here, too. As John Adams once said, that our Constitution was for a religious and moral people. It is wholly inadequate for the governments of any other. We definitely agree with that. We have local chapters around the country. We have a chapter here in Manchester. And we have actually a Facebook page, New Hampshire Friends of the John Birch Society. We have a lot of events going on a regular basis. And we're all volunteer. I mean, I'm a full-time field staff, but we do have a small field staff. But for the most part, we're a volunteer organization, and people get together. We have a national agenda, and we have local agenda items, too. Some of the issues we've been fighting, of course, Common Core, Agenda 21, and I'd like to think that we played a key role in making it an issue here in New Hampshire, where it wasn't an issue about 5 or 6 years ago. It became one. Also, this Article 5 convention. We've been fighting this since the early 80s, and we were at one time 2 states away from a formal call for a convention. So,
What is the status of that now? I don't even know what it is.
well, that's a good question, because it's hard to understand exactly. 28 states have live applications for an Article 5 convention, and not calls, but applications. Article 5 says states apply. The problem, well, it's not a problem as far as I'm concerned. Congress may or may not acknowledge the wording of the applications. They may say, well, this application is 30 years old. We're not going to acknowledge it. So we're not sure. But we have to act like we're 6 states away from an Article 5 convention, because Congress can call one tomorrow. There's been over 700 applications over the years, and of course a number of states had rescinded all of their calls. In fact, New Hampshire, in 2010, thanks to mainly the work of the John Birch Society, in particular a man named Bill McNally, every 2 years a resolution would be introduced, and it would usually die, inexpedient legislate and die on the floor or be tabled. And in 2010, there were mostly Liberty Republicans that introduced, that sponsored the resolution or co-sponsored, but it passed in Democrat majority. A pretty large majority of both parties rescinded all of the old calls. And then a group called ALEC. This is a corporate entity called the American Legislative Exchange Council, mainly made up of Republicans. And you go to their website to say, yeah, I agree with a few of the things they do, but you look at some of the sponsors, and they're also supporters of the Transatlantic Partnership and Trans-Pacific Partnership. So they're not I would say they're more neocon than they would be liberty-minded. Sure. And they were just a legislation machine, and they were able to get some legislators to introduce a new one. And we beat back a few of the calls. And in 2012, it was the way that it was worded, and it was one of these therefores, and and then on the last sentence, which most people didn't read, or an Article 5 convention. So it passed, and we thought we killed it in the Senate, and it was inexpedient to legislate, and it passed the Senate. So that's really the big issue here. There are 2 other resolutions that are pending. In fact, they may be voted upon any time the next week or so. This would just give icing on the cake, and it would help these lobbyist groups. And we have emphasized lobbyist groups that spend tons of money, take these legislators out to a lunch, and they schmooze them and wine them and dine them, and they buy into this without a lot of opposition.
You're not suggesting that these representatives don't represent the people; they represent the lobbyists. You're not suggesting that.
There was a man, Jordan Eulery. Jordan's a state rep, and he's a pretty decent guy. He has a good voting record. He's one of the he's listed as I'm not sure what his title is, but if you go to the ALEC website, you'll see him and Gary Daniels as a senator as they're in state whatever they're called, liaisons, and. Do they represent the people, or do they represent the organizations, the lobbyist organizations?
I think it's pretty clear, lobbyists, yeah.
It could be a little bit of both. I mean, you might say, hey, I like this resolution that this organization is introducing, regardless of where they're from. I mean, we have a model resolution to rescind all calls, and if you like it, please, help us get this thing through. So, but because you may agree with one issue, it doesn't mean you have to agree with everything. So I guess that's the questions that the voters or the constituents of those men have to ask themselves. That's I think the best answer I can have for that.
I was being a little facetious.
I understand that. Yes, I understand that.
I think you saw that. I was trying to fight back a smile, but it was hard.
One of the things that's brought up is they call it a convention of states. They say it's an amendment convention, not a constitutional convention. Is that?
Well, that's brilliant. That's a brilliant strategy they used. For a number of years, the term constitutional convention has been used by people on both sides of the issue. And it's important to point out, too, that there are people on the left and right have both oppose and support Article 5 for different reasons. I can't say exactly when that term was first used, but at least the 70s, maybe in the 60s. It could have even been earlier than that. And the term Constitutional Convention is not in the Constitution. Neither is the term Convention of States. 2011 in September, there was a conference. It was called Conference on the Constitutional Convention at Harvard University. I tried to get our organization to be members, panelists of this group. For some reason, they never bothered calling me back or emailing me back. However, we did get media credential, and I spent a day there. So, and the man, it was co-sponsored by Mr. Mark Meckler, who later founded Convention of States, and Larry Lessig, Professor Lessig, who is very well known in New Hampshire. He's a part of the New Hampshire Rebellion. He's very active in that. I would call him an anti-Christian bigot, because if you go to a YouTube and see Larry Lessig mocks Christianity, you will see why I say that. Imagine if he was mocking Muhammad. I'm sure he'd be a household name.
Yeah.
And Larry is a man of the left, no question about it. He, in 1993, authored an article in the Texas Law Review advocating a new constitution. And I actually got him on video. I was at this event outside on the steps of this where the meeting was held. He's being interviewed by Cenk Uygur of Wolfpack, the founder of Wolfpack. He's also the head of the Young Turks, which is a YouTube media entity.
I know that.
And Cenk said something to the effect that the first convention we had, this would be under the Articles of Confederation. He said the first one was a runaway. He's laughing. And he said, look what we got. Let's hope that this next convention will be a runaway. And Lessig laughs and said, yes, let's hope for a runaway. So they used the terms. I didn't. They said they want to have a runaway. And Mr. Mark Meckler, who was pretty much not involved with the Patriot movement or politics until 2007, and like General Eisenhower, he was like a lieutenant colonel. Within 2 years, he's a general. Next thing you know, Meckler's the go-to guy in the media. He's the spokesman for the Tea Party group. Well, I don't know who made him a spokesman. I certainly did, unlike you guys did. The media doesn't go to you when they want a quote from the Tea Party. He was at this event, and then within a short time, he forms this thing called Convention of States. I think that was formed in 2013. Now, so if it was okay in 2011 to use the term Constitutional Convention, why all of a sudden did it become a non-issue? And if you look at the resolutions the last 50 years, most of those resolutions use the term Constitutional Convention on it. In fact, I was at the executive session of the House Committee, Veterans and Federal Affairs. At this committee, you're not allowed to testify, but if a member of the committee wants a clarification with the permission of the chairman, you could. So thankfully, I wasn't asked to speak, but neither was Mike. Mike Farris was asked to speak, and then the committee chairman said no. Enough's enough. So Mike Farris and I had a little word. He showed me a resolution that was one of the first from Virginia. This would be right before the Constitution was actually it was still wet. It was the ink wasn't even dry yet. New York and Virginia had, and I think Virginia was the first one. So in the body of the resolution was the term Convention of States. But that was probably the only time we've seen it, and it doesn't make it that comment doesn't make it legal.
Right.
So whatever you want to call it, you say at conventions, yes. Article 5 says that the delegates will propose amendments, plural. But these folks are convinced that you can limit it to whatever the application says, whatever the application from that given state.
To me, that just smells of marketing. They want to.
It's a great marketing because it's confusing a lot of people too.
Exactly.
Oh no, it's a convention of states, and it's interesting. You name the organization after the term. You know, yeah.
You can call it what you will. The scariest part of that whole thing with me, after reading Article 5, is the fact that Congress sets the mode of ratification.
That's correct, and that's another fact
that is scary.
They never bring this up. I've never heard any of the folks when they testify, these Article 5 supporters, they'll always say, well, look, the safeguard is it still takes 3/4 of the state legislators. And there's no way 3/4 of state legislators around the country will ever amend or agree to anything that's unreasonable. Well, then you say, okay, what's unreasonable? If I was there, I'd want to repeal the 16th Amendment, the 17th Amendment. I want to repeal those two. Well, to a progressive, to repeal the income tax would be unthinkable. I'd like to abolish the Department of Education, and not that you need an amendment to do these things. You know, I would like to see us out of NATO. You know, out of the UN. That's unreasonable to most people, but to me, it's very reasonable.
Yep.
You know, so that's a subjective term.
I wanted to mention something that lines up with what you just said. When I was up at the State House here in New Hampshire on SCR 4,
SCR4 is the Convention of States resolution for
Right.
Article 5, yeah.
And what had happened was, I don't remember the sponsor's name. I don't remember names very well, so
Gary Daniels, Senator
you.
again, yeah.
yeah, Senator Daniels stood up and he
Who's
read
by the way, I
Article
think he's a
5.
pretty good guy. He's a pretty
Well,
decent
he
guy.
read the Article 5,
Yeah.
Hal, but he neglected to mention Congress sets the mode of ratification. And I'm sitting there saying,
Yeah.
geez, that's convenient that he left that out.
Yeah.
And it's suspect to me. He may be a nice guy. I don't know him at all. I've never met the man. But I was certainly suspect when I heard that, because I'm saying, why didn't you read the whole thing? It was only a few more lines.
I know.
And I brought that up, and I said, that's the part that scares me as an American. You want to let Congress, who everybody in the room was chastising, set the mode for ratification. And if they say the delegates can do it, guess
Well,
what?
I think they have the mode is either the legislatures or ratifying conventions. They did it one
Two
time.
delegates.
Well, the delegates will propose amendments, so they get 100 amendments out of this convention. It will either go to the state legislators, and you need 3/4, or Congress can determine the mode would be either the state legislators or state ratifying conventions. Now, they did that one time with the 21st Amendment, which repealed prohibition. There were a lot. They didn't think they had enough state legislators that would have repealed the 18th Amendment, so they did it this way, and it's a lot easier to pick and choose the delegates to this ratifying convention than it would be to have the state assembly. They know states like Utah, and in fact Maine. Maine was the first dry state in the Union back in the 1890s, I think. So there was a lot of states that would not have gone for it, so they decided to try this route. There's another issue, too. If you look in the Constitution, and you guys know it pretty well, members of Congress cannot serve as members of the executive branch. But what's preventing members of Congress from serving as delegates to this convention? Let's look at a precedent. When states have their conventions, and they usually call them constitutional conventions, don't they? They don't call them ratifying or convent. They call them constitutional conventions. Black's Law Dictionary describes this as you look at, when you bring this up, they'll say, well, Black was a progressive. I don't know what he was. He may have been, he may not. He might have been just a nerdy clerk for us, we know. But, so if he was a progressive, therefore the definition doesn't mean anything. So members of the House and state houses, the legislators, almost always serve as delegates to state conventions. So what's preventing members of Congress to serve? Mm-hmm. So your 4 reps, your 2 senators and 2 U.S. congressmen could very well serve as delegates. We don't know. And when these Article 5 people come up there and they'll say, "Oh no, it will be the people, it will be this," well, they have no idea because there's no laws guiding it right now.
It's up to Congress.
It's up to Congress. And Judge Bork, the late Judge Robert Bork, was asked his opinion by a legislator in Utah. He wrote back to him, and he said that there's lots of disagreement among my people in the legal profession. His opinion, he said that even if Congress did pass a law, how would they enforce it? So even if Congress passes a law, which they have not, they have tried to, they have not yet. So the New Hampshire can pass a law that says delegates must obey the instructions in the resolution. Okay, so the crime, if they commit the crime outside of the state, what are they going to do? They're going to send state police down to arrest them? Unless the convention's held here, they'll have no jurisdiction. What if Congress grants them immunity? What if the vote's in secret? So they don't know. Oh, well, okay, we get 50 states that all pass these laws. I think only a few states have actually had these laws passed. So all 50 states would have to do it. And our friend Publius, she said any good trial attorney would be able to get you off pretty quickly. But what are they going to put you in jail? So the thing about these resolutions, all these whereases and therefores, the only operative aspect is what the Article 5 says the states are supposed to do. They're supposed to actually apply for one. Nothing in Article 5 says the states will determine what they are. When I say the states, I mean state legislators.
Right.
So their job is to actually apply for one, period. So Congress isn't looking. Now, Congress may look at the wording because Congress may not be too crazy about calling one, although that could change tomorrow. We don't know. So they may say we want to just have an amendment for a balanced budget or a flag burning or to outlaw abortion or whatever. The delegates can get down there. They can ignore. They don't have to pay any attention to any of the instructions that they get because they don't represent the legislators. They represent the people from the state. And it was interesting, too. They're lame duck. Their only job is to be a convention. And then they go home, and it's over. They don't have to worry about getting reelected.
No accountability,
So
I don't want to steal Dean's thunder, but he brought this up when we had the show a few weeks ago. people who have an issue with this book, I think people are ignorant of this book and they don't know.
They certainly
Or
are.
people are trying to trash it, period. But why would you say Congress sucks, for lack of a better word, or the legislature, or all these people, and then turn around and say, well, let's let Congress fix this. They're part of the problem. You're going to let the fox guard the hen house?
Well, this is
Makes no sense.
the founders gave us frequent elections every 2 years at the federal level. Every 2 years, you can have a nonviolent revolution, but most people they don't even know who represents them in Congress.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have a table at the Cheshire Fair every year for the last, I don't know, 7 or 8, maybe 9 years. And we'll have petitions to members of Congress, for example, to repeal Obamacare. And people come up to you, I want to sign that petition. I hate Obamacare. I'm going to lose my job, lose my insurance. The next question is, who's your member of Congress? Most people, we looked at it, sort of an unscientific poll. About 95% of the people that come to our table that are very strongly against, or in favor of sign our petition, do not know who the member of Congress is.
That's about in line with Congress's approval rating.
Right. So if you don't know, it's interesting. What a job. Imagine having a job where your employers don't know who you are. Mm-hmm. You can vote yourself a pay raise, right? Mm-hmm. And you're always working almost always working in the worst interest of your employers. That's Congress.
Yeah.
So if the people were paying attention, that Congress could be put under control, that the right people get elected, and if they weren't doing the job, they will be voted out of office every 2 years.
I say this all the time. I mean, we're in agreement here. If people centered themselves around this document, we could bring this country back. That's my
Now,
firm
there's
belief.
a state rep who's a big Article 5 supporter, and we're exchanging emails back and forth. And he's talking about the people. We the people are part of the problem. And people don't want to admit that. He said, well, we the people should, and he said, and when I was at this executive session, one of the state legislators said, I'm with the founders and with the people. Really?
Sounds good, huh?
Yeah. Well, the founders never called an Article 5 convention. Mm-hmm. Why not? If it was such a great idea, they should be having them every 6 months. That we would have had a long history of Article 5 convention. We've never had one. So if it was such a great idea, how come we've never had one? Right?
Good point.
And if the founders wanted one so badly, they put it in there. But notice they put it in there. They wanted 2/3 of the states. Mm-hmm. That's hard to get that majority. Mm-hmm. There's a good reason for that. They did not want to see amendments, frivolous amendments, or a lot of amendments. Could you imagine all the amendments that have been proposed since the country was founded? There's been hundreds of them, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a few that should be in there that aren't. But that's a topic for another show, right? But imagine we would have amended this Constitution out of existence if it was an easy process. So it was made hard on purpose. And one of the supporters in Article 5, I'm with the Constitution. They calling me a hypocrite because I'm against an Article 5 convention. That's like saying I'm against a tax increase because Congress can raise taxes. It's in they can lay and collect taxes. So to be against a tax increase would be unconstitutional. That's nonsense. It's ridiculous reasoning. It's emotionalism.
It's ignorant.
And unfortunately, New Hampshire already has a live call, and it's been so difficult to get enough people. We get some sponsors. We get people but we need people to make it their big issue. Mm-hmm. Where you have legislators that make it an important issue is where you're going to have an impact. Where we're going to be able to get it repealed and rescinded.
Well, I've always made a claim that this book, our ignorance of it, and when I say the people, I'm talking about the general public, law enforcement, and the legislature. Including Congress. Yeah. Not all of them. There are exceptions. I know that. But generally speaking, we're all ignorant of this, and we are the problem.
Well, one of the things that these Article 5 people, Mr. Mike Farris, he wants to have a parental rights amendment, federal amendment. We already have one. It's called the 10th Amendment. The federal government has no business messing with the families. They do all the time. Ever since the 70s, the Mondale Act, that basically gave money to state agencies dealing with divorce families. That's all unconstitutional. Mm-hmm. You don't need an amendment to say you can't do this or that. And the basis for this was these UN treaties on the child and these other UN treaties on the handicap. The United States has no business making treaties with the UN to begin with. Mm-hmm. The UN isn't a foreign country. It's a collection of third world social misfits, mostly unaccountable and unelected, on the East River of New York City. It's not a country. And it has nothing to do with treaties are supposed to be dealing with things of nations, trade, navigational rights, flying over your airspace, mail, things of that nature. It has nothing to do with what our policies of handicap, or whether or not the treaty on the child, where children have the right of a minor child can wear a satanic T-shirt and the parents can't do anything about it. That's got nothing to do with treaty. If that's what you want in your country, that's fine, but that's not what we're going to do here. So the 10th Amendment says, no, you can't mess with that. And treaties are never supposed to supersede the Constitution. This idea that a treaty will nullify the Constitution, Thomas Jefferson addressed it that one time, and he said, if that's the case, he said, if the President and 2/3 of the Senate can do away with the rest of the Constitution, we have no Constitution at all. So that's an absurd notion that some people buy into.
Well, anyone that knows the Constitution can clearly look at our country and say that it's being trampled, walked on.
There's no
ignored.
question about it, yeah.
And so, just from a simple point of logic, why would we turn it over to them to amend it?
To amend it.
How about this? How about follow the Constitution first, then we'll give you the chance to amend it.
Right.
If there's a problem.
You and I
Right.
know we're a damn long way from following the Constitution, and it would be an entirely different country to get
You
there.
you got these folks in support of an Article 5. I would say mainly they're neoconservatives,
Yep.
big government conservatives.
Sure.
They latch onto a bandwagon. They have their corporate talk radio show hosts like Mark Levin.
Yep.
If you sit to Mark Levin or rant and rave about our runaway Congress, you'd say, let's stop foreign aid. You see how nasty he gets. Yeah, Mark, I agree. Where do we start? Let's stop all foreign aid to all countries. It's unconstitutional. You see how quickly. We take all of our troops out of the Middle East, where we're not supposed to be enforcing UN resolutions.
Right.
You see how quickly they show the neocon credentials.
Yep.
Do you think taking the 900 military bases out of 152 countries would have an impact?
It would, on the budget, I would think, yeah, a little bit. I mean, look, I was a U.S. Army soldier. I was in NATO in the 70s. At that time, I thought, well, this is the front line, of our defense. European Union is a very wealthy entity. They don't need us over there. So it's going to be more than maybe the first decade after World War II, there may have been a need for our presence. Not now. We're still in Korea.
Why do we have to fight at the drop of a hat?
That's right. Why? That's exactly. In fact, you ask the average person, when's the last time the United States declared war? And they'll think, well, I don't know, was it 1991 or the Gulf War, or was it Gulf War II? We haven't declared war since right after Pearl Harbor. Yet we've been in all kinds of wars. And
do you know who declared that war?
Who declared that war? Well, Congress declared it.
I believe it was Postmaster General.
Oh, well,
I could be wrong.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I know that Roosevelt asked for a declaration of war, and it was I don't think anyone voted against it after Pearl Harbor. Yeah.
Right.
So.
But all those things are pre-organized, and I agree with what you said in the very beginning, that everything that's happened is orchestrated, and there is a great deal of ineptitude and infighting, backbiting, that sort of stuff that goes on. But I think from the higher levels of control, it's highly orchestrated, heavily controlled.
Well, this is fascinating. I mentioned Professor Larry Lessig. He's one of the left-wing supporters of an Article 5. And he's one of these 99%ers, a man of the people. Wouldn't you know he gets invited to speak at the Bilderberg Group? Now, the Bilderberg Group doesn't invite, your typical blue-collar, disaffected person. And he said, I'd never heard of this organization. Oh, that's why they invited you, Larry. Yeah, sure.
Right.
And Mark Meckler, the conservative, right? He's supposed to be this great Tea Party guy. Well, visit this website called livingroomconversations.org. You'll see Mr. Meckler hobnobbing with the head of MoveOn.org, like they're old buddies, being the organization's being endorsed by Van Jones, who was so bad, even he was so far to the left, even Obama had to jettison him out.
Yeah, he did.
And if you live in New Hampshire, you'll see a connection between a group called New Hampshire Listens and this Living Room Conversations. Now, if you know anything about New Hampshire Listens, they basically do the Delphi technique around the state to implement leftist agenda, right? Like Agenda 21. So why would this conservative guy that you think is a champion of liberty hobnob with these people? Someone said, oh, that's a fallacy, guilt by association. Well, if you quack like a duck and maybe you feed the ducks all the time and you're swimming with the ducks, perhaps you're sympathetic to the duck philosophy.
We're down to probably about a minute here, so I just want to mention that you have a Facebook page.
We have a website.
In Hampshire, it is Friends of John Birch Society?
New Hampshire Friends of the John Birch Society.
All right.
And our website is www.jbs.org, where you can find a lot of information about this issue, some videos on YouTube. Also, a Facebook page called Stop the Constitutional Convention. Lots of updated information. And you're welcome to give me a phone call. I've given my number here. It's 857-498-1309. I live right in Boston, and I come up to New Hampshire on a regular basis.
All right. Well, thank you for being here. It certainly is an honor and a pleasure to have you.
Well, same here.
I appreciate your contribution to the show and to what you do.
Thank you.
For our country.
Thank you.
It's a great privilege to mix with people that are up to big game like that and helping to restore the founding principles of our country.
Thank you.
It's truly an honor. Real quick, I just want to mention that for Richie and I are state coordinators for the National Liberty Alliance. We hold meetings once a week, and we're happy to have anybody join us. It's on Wednesday evenings. The National Liberty Alliance is working to restore the common law grand juries in our country to allow we the people to meet and investigate our government and hold them accountable and investigate criminal wrongdoing. It is one of the most powerful tools, as mentioned in Williams versus USA by Justice Scalia. So thank you so much. Richie, did you want to say anything real quick?
No, just have a good night. Actually, there is. Share our program, please. We have to break the chain of ignorance. The way to do that is to share information. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Have a good day.